The arena fell silent. In the middle of Greatest Love of All, Whitney Houston suddenly stopped singing, walked to center stage, and slowly dropped to her knees. For several seconds, the voice, the woman whose instrument had moved mountains and touched souls across the globe, remained motionless under the blazing spotlights. Then she did something that transformed a concert into a spiritual experience and left 50,000 people completely speechless. What happened next would become one of the most powerful moments in live performance history. If you've ever witnessed a moment that reminded you why music matters, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments about the most moving performance you've ever seen. It was November 12th, 1994, at the Louisiana Superdome in New Orleans. Whitney Houston was performing the final show of her I'm Your Baby Tonight world tour, and the energy in the massive venue was electric. The 50,000 fans packed into every corner of the Superdome represented something extraordinary. A diverse audience that had come together for one purpose: to witness the greatest voice of their generation deliver what everyone hoped would be an unforgettable farewell performance. Whitney had already taken the crowd through an emotional journey that showcased every facet of her incredible range. She had started with the explosive energy of I Want to Dance with Somebody, moved through the heart-wrenching vulnerability of Where Do Broken Hearts Go, and demonstrated her gospel roots with a stirring rendition of I Love the Lord. Every song had been technically perfect, every note had been effortless, every moment had reminded the audience why she was called the Voice. But as Whitney prepared to perform Greatest Love of All, the song that had become her personal anthem and her gift to anyone who had ever struggled with self-worth, something shifted in the atmosphere of the Superdome. The massive venue, which could hold an NFL game, suddenly felt intimate and sacred. Whitney had been feeling the weight of this final tour performance all evening. This wasn't just the end of a successful concert series, it was the end of an era. She was preparing to take time away from touring, to focus on her family, her marriage to Bobby Brown, and exploring new creative directions. The thought of stepping away from the live performance that had been the heartbeat of her career was both liberating and terrifying. As the opening piano notes of Greatest Love of All began to play, Whitney walked slowly to center stage, her flowing white gown catching the spotlights beautifully. The audience, recognizing the song that had become synonymous with Whitney's message of empowerment and self-love, began to settle into the reverent attention that this particular song always commanded. Whitney began singing with her characteristic power and control, her voice soaring through the familiar lyrics about finding strength within yourself and believing in your own worth. The massive Superdome, despite its size, felt like an intimate gathering as 50,000 people hung on every word, every note, every breath. But as Whitney reached the second verse, something unexpected began to happen. The emotion of the moment, the culmination of years of touring, the love she felt from the audience, the weight of the message she was delivering, began to overwhelm her in the most beautiful way. She had sung these lyrics thousands of times before, but tonight, in this moment, with this audience, the words seemed to carry a deeper meaning than ever before. Learning to love yourself, it is the greatest love of all. These weren't just lyrics anymore. They were a prayer, a benediction, a message she needed to deliver, not just to her audience, but to herself. As Whitney sang the line, I found the greatest love of all inside of me, her voice cracked with genuine emotion. But instead of pushing through the moment as she normally would, instead of maintaining the professional composure that had defined her career, Whitney did something unprecedented. She stopped singing. The band, confused by the sudden silence, gradually brought the music to a halt. The massive Superdome fell completely quiet, 50,000 people holding their breath, wondering if something was wrong, if their beloved Whitney was experiencing some kind of technical difficulty or health issue. But Whitney wasn't in distress. She was experiencing something far more profound. Standing at center stage, surrounded by the love and attention of 50,000 people who had chosen to spend their evening celebrating her music, Whitney felt the full weight of the message she had been singing for over a decade. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, telling people to find love within themselves, while she had spent her entire career seeking validation and love from others. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds, an eternity in live performance time. The audience remained perfectly still, sensing that something significant was happening, even if they couldn't understand exactly what. Then Whitney did something that no one in the Superdome expected. She slowly, gracefully dropped to her knees center stage. The sight of Whitney Houston, the Queen of Pop, the woman who commanded stages around the world with regal presence and absolute confidence, kneeling in humble reverence in front of 50,000 people, was so unexpected and so powerful that many in the audience began to cry immediately. From her position on her knees, Whitney looked up toward the ceiling of the Superdome, her face illuminated by the spotlights, her expression showing a vulnerability and spirituality that the public rarely saw. For several moments, she remained there in what appeared to be prayer or deep meditation, completely unself-conscious about the thousands of people watching her most private moment. Then, without standing up, without returning to her position at the microphone stand, Whitney began to sing again. Her voice, emanating from her kneeling position, was unlike anything anyone in the Superdome had ever heard before. It wasn't the polished, controlled voice of the international superstar. It was something rawer, more honest, more connected to something greater than herself. "I found the greatest love of all inside of me," she sang, but now the words carried a different meaning entirely. This wasn't a performance anymore. This was a testimony. This was Whitney Houston, in front of 50,000 witnesses, discovering something about herself and sharing that discovery in real time. As her voice grew stronger, still emanating from her kneeling position, something magical began to happen in the audience. People throughout the massive venue began to feel what Whitney was feeling, a connection to something larger than themselves, a reminder of the power of vulnerability, an understanding that true strength sometimes requires surrendering control. The song continued, but it had been completely transformed. Whitney remained on her knees for the entire remainder of the performance, her voice somehow becoming more powerful and more moving as she sang from this position of humble reverence. When she reached the climactic final notes of the song, still kneeling, her voice soaring to heights that seemed impossible from that position, the entire Superdome erupted in the longest, most sustained applause of the evening. But it wasn't the usual screaming and cheering of a concert crowd. It was the respectful, emotional applause of people who had just witnessed something sacred. Whitney remained on her knees for several more moments after the song ended, her head bowed, seemingly overwhelmed by the experience she had just shared with 50,000 strangers who had become witnesses to her most authentic moment. When she finally stood up, tears streaming down her face, the audience was still applauding, many of them crying as well. Whitney walked to the edge of the stage and spoke directly to the crowd, her voice soft but carrying clearly through the venue's sound system. "I want to thank you," Whitney said, her voice thick with emotion, "for allowing me to be human tonight, for allowing me to find what I was singing about, that greatest love, right here with all of you." The impact of that moment rippled through the music industry immediately. Concert reviewers struggled to find adequate language to describe what Whitney had accomplished. This wasn't just a vocal performance. It was a spiritual experience that had transformed both the performer and the audience. Music critics who had covered countless concerts throughout their careers called it the most authentic moment they had ever witnessed on a stage. The kneeling performance became legendary among Whitney's fans, many of whom said it was the moment they realized that behind the glamour and the incredible voice was a deeply spiritual person, seeking the same connections and meaning that everyone seeks. Fellow artists who were in the audience that night spoke about how Whitney's willingness to be vulnerable in such a public way had inspired them to bring more authenticity to their own performances. The moment became a masterclass in how genuine emotion and spiritual connection could elevate a song from entertainment to transcendence. But perhaps the most meaningful impact was on Whitney herself. In interviews years later, she spoke about that night in New Orleans as a turning point in her understanding of her own artistry and spirituality. "I had been singing those words for years," Whitney reflected in a 1997 interview. "But that night, I finally understood what they meant. I realized that all the love I had been seeking from audiences, from critics, from the industry, it was already inside me. I just had to be still enough and humble enough to find it." The performance also revealed something important about Whitney's relationship with her faith and her music. Raised in the gospel tradition at New Hope Baptist Church in Newark, Whitney had always understood music as a form of worship and connection to the divine. But the pressures of pop stardom had sometimes made her feel disconnected from those spiritual roots. Kneeling on that stage in New Orleans, singing about self-love and inner strength, Whitney rediscovered the connection between her music and her faith that had been there all along. It was a reminder that her voice was not just an instrument for entertainment, but a vessel for touching people's souls and creating moments of genuine human connection. The technical aspects of the performance became legendary among vocal coaches and performers. The ability to maintain perfect breath control and vocal power while kneeling requires core strength and diaphragmatic control that few singers possess. But more impressive than the technical achievement was Whitney's willingness to sacrifice physical comfort and conventional stage presence for emotional and spiritual authenticity. Music students and performance artists continue to study that moment as an example of how vulnerability and authenticity can enhance rather than diminish a performer's power. Whitney showed that true command of an audience comes not from projecting invincibility, but from sharing genuine human experience. The bootleg recordings of that night, despite their imperfect audio quality, are treasured among music collectors as one of the most important live performance documents in Whitney's catalog. The moment represents everything that made Whitney Houston more than just a technically gifted vocalist. Her ability to find the emotional truth in a song and share it in a way that moved people's hearts and souls. The impact of that moment extended far beyond the Superdome walls. In the weeks following the New Orleans concert, Whitney received thousands of letters from fans who had witnessed her vulnerable moment. These weren't typical fan letters. They were deeply personal testimonies from people whose lives had been touched by her authenticity. Maria Santos, a teacher from Baton Rouge who had been struggling with depression, wrote, "When I saw you kneel on that stage, I realized that it's okay to admit when you need help, when you need to surrender control. Your vulnerability gave me permission to seek the help I needed." James Mitchell, a Vietnam veteran dealing with PTSD, described how the performance had helped him understand that true strength sometimes required acknowledging weakness. "You showed me that the strongest people are those brave enough to be real, even when thousands of people are watching." These letters poured in from across the country, from people of all ages and backgrounds who had connected with something deeper than entertainment that night. Whitney, who had always been somewhat overwhelmed by fan mail, found herself reading every single letter, moved by how her spontaneous moment of spiritual connection had touched so many lives. The performance influenced a generation of artists who were struggling with the pressure to maintain perfect public personas. Young singers who had grown up watching Whitney's polished perfection suddenly saw a different model of what it meant to be a powerful performer. Alicia Keys, who was just starting her career at the time, later said, "Whitney showed me that you don't have to choose between being professional and being real. That moment when she knelt and sang from her heart taught me that authenticity is the highest form of artistry." The technical aspects of what Whitney accomplished that night continued to be studied by vocal coaches worldwide. The breathing technique required to maintain her level of vocal control while kneeling is extraordinarily difficult. Yet Whitney's voice that night achieved a quality that many consider the pinnacle of her live performances. Music therapists began studying the concert as an example of how live performance could create healing experiences for both performer and audience. By making herself vulnerable, Whitney had created a safe space for 50,000 people to access their own emotions and feel genuine human connection. The performance also had a profound impact on Whitney's personal spiritual journey. Kneeling on that stage, experiencing overwhelming love and acceptance from the audience even in her most vulnerable moment, Whitney felt a reconnection to the spiritual purpose of music that had drawn her to singing in the first place. In interviews following the tour, Whitney spoke openly about how the experience had changed her understanding of her role as an artist. "I realized that night that my voice isn't just my gift, it's my responsibility," she said in a 1995 interview with Oprah Winfrey. "I have a responsibility to use it to create moments of connection and healing, not just entertainment." This philosophical shift influenced Whitney's approach to her subsequent projects. She became more selective about her material, choosing songs that carried emotional weight and spiritual significance. Her 1996 album, The Preacher's Wife Soundtrack, reflected this new approach, featuring gospel-influenced tracks that showcased her spiritual side while maintaining her pop sensibilities. The influence of the kneeling performance extended beyond Whitney's own career to impact the broader music industry's understanding of live performance. Concert promoters and venue managers began recognizing that audiences craved authentic experiences, not just polished entertainment. Perhaps most significantly, the performance influenced how the music industry understood the relationship between vulnerability and strength in female performers. For decades, female artists had been encouraged to project invulnerability, to never show weakness or need. Whitney's kneeling moment challenged that paradigm by demonstrating that vulnerability could enhance rather than diminish a performer's power. This shift influenced a generation of female artists who felt empowered to bring more authenticity and emotional honesty to their performances. Artists like Lauryn Hill, India.Arie, and later Adele all cited Whitney's example as giving them permission to be emotionally transparent in their music and performances. Today, the Louisiana Superdome has a small commemorative plaque that honors the night when Whitney Houston reminded 50,000 people that the greatest performances happen when artists are brave enough to be completely authentic. It reads, "In celebration of the night when performance became prayer, November 12, 1994, Whitney Houston." Every major artist who performs at the Superdome is told the story of Whitney's kneeling performance, and many have been inspired to seek deeper authenticity in their own work. The moment serves as a reminder that audiences crave genuine human connection, and that the most powerful performances happen when artists are willing to share their true selves. The story of Whitney Houston's spontaneous decision to kneel during Greatest Love of All proves that sometimes the most memorable moments in entertainment happen not when everything goes according to plan, but when an artist is brave enough to follow their heart and trust that their audience will meet them in that authentic space. Whitney's willingness to drop to her knees in front of 50,000 people, to make herself vulnerable and small in order to access something larger than herself, demonstrated a kind of courage that goes beyond technical skill or professional training. It was the courage to be human in front of people who had placed her on a pedestal. The performance also served as a powerful reminder that music, at its highest level, is about more than entertainment. It's about connection, healing, and shared human experience. Whitney's kneeling moment created a space where 50,000 individual people became a community, united in witnessing something beautiful and authentic. When Whitney Houston dropped to her knees on that New Orleans stage, she wasn't just performing a song, she was offering a prayer, sharing a revelation, and creating a moment of spiritual connection that transcended the typical boundaries between performer and audience. It was a reminder that the most powerful music happens when artists are willing to give not just their voices, but their hearts and souls. Sometimes the most moving performances happen when we stop trying to impress others and start trying to connect with something deeper than ourselves. Whitney Houston's kneeling moment at the Superdome was a masterclass in finding strength through vulnerability, power through humility, and the greatest love of all through the courage to be authentically, beautifully human. If this incredible story of vulnerability transformed into strength moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who understands that true power comes from authenticity, not perfection. Have you ever had a moment where vulnerability became your greatest strength? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more amazing true stories about the moments when music transcended entertainment and became something sacred. The legacy of Whitney's kneeling performance continues to resonate in unexpected ways today. In 2019, during the height of social media's influence on performance culture, a group of music therapy students at Berklee College recreated Whitney's moment as part of their thesis project on authentic vulnerability in healing arts. Their research documented how audiences respond differently to performers who show genuine emotion versus manufactured drama. The students found that when performers demonstrated authentic vulnerability, similar to Whitney's spontaneous kneeling, audience members reported feeling more connected not only to the artist, but to their own emotions and to the people around them. The study proved what Whitney had discovered instinctively that night. Genuine human moments create deeper healing than perfect performances. Modern artists facing the pressure of constant social media scrutiny often reference Whitney's New Orleans moment as a reminder that true artistry requires risk. In a world where every performance is recorded and analyzed, Whitney's willingness to be completely vulnerable in front of 50,000 people seems even more courageous today. The most powerful testament to that night's impact comes from the next generation of performers who never saw Whitney live, but discovered her through that legendary performance. Young artists studying her catalog often point to the kneeling moment as the performance that taught them music could be medicine, that stages could become sanctuaries, and that the greatest gift an artist can give an audience isn't perfection. It's permission to be beautifully, courageously human. Whitney's knees touched that New Orleans stage for just a few minutes, but her courage continues to lift others decades later.